Around 200 citizens have contacted the Foreign Office asking for help to leave the besieged region since October the 7th, with Rishi Sunak calling for a pause in fighting in order to bring them out and bring them home. More than 80 MPs back here in the UK have now urged the government to go further than a pause and demand a ceasefire, with London's Mayor Sadiq Khan the latest politician to join those calls, a decision that Rishi Sunak says would only benefit Hamas.
Israel has a right to defend itself, to target those responsible for the appalling terror attack of the 7th of October, and to take action to free the hostages. But a widespread military escalation will only deepen the humanitarian disaster. It will increase human suffering on all sides. No nation, including Israel, has the right to break international law.
Well, commentator Sam Armstrong is still with me here in the studio. We're also joined by Ralph Schollhammer. He's an economist and political theorist at Webster University in Vienna. Delighted to have you both back in the studio. Before we get to your thoughts, though, let's on where we are with Israel. I'm joined now by Conservative MP Bob Seely. He's a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. He's also a former member of the British Armed Forces, serving in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya and on the ISIS campaigns. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Bob.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I know I'm used to the morning thing. Hey, I said this was talk breakfast a few moments ago. We've no idea what's going on. Let's try and find out what's going on in the Middle East, though. Just specifically, let's talk about these 200 Brits trapped in Gaza. We're not talking about hostages. We think that maybe 5 Britons may be among those hostages. 200 Brits, people, probably many of them having dual nationality passports, probably going to visit family members in Gaza. Of course, they can't leave Gaza, so they've been going to visit, who are trapped there now. We know that many have contacted the British Foreign Office. The UK Border Force have sent teams, they say, to the Rafah crossing. If and when it opens again, some aid trickle has gone in, but it's not open to people leaving Gaza. What are the hopes of getting those 200 Brits who want to leave out of the Gaza Strip?
I would have thought those hopes are rising all the time, because as long as they can get to the Egyptian crossing point with our border folks on the other side liaising, we should be able to get them out. It has taken a long time. It is clearly not great that it's taken so long, but to the government's credit, it is doing what it can in appalling circumstances when Gaza, as we know, is being significantly attacked and bombed by Israel.
What do you think the chances are we're going to get the hostages out? We're told, 229, I think, is the latest figure that the Hamas is giving and Israel is giving, of those who are believed to be missing, held by Hamas. Although Hamas said they think some 50 of them have died as a result of Israeli airstrikes. We have no way of verifying that at all, of course. And given that they are hostage takers, why would we trust anything they have to say? We're told that Qatar is hopeful that within a week or so we may see some 50 of those hostages, maybe the children, maybe those who are suffering from illnesses, needing medication, being released. We're told that Iran is even involved. Vladimir Putin inviting people to Moscow. He, of course, has some Russian hostages held as well. I think some 25 different nationalities being held. What do you think the hopes are that we will see the vast majority of those people ever leave Hamas clutches alive and well?
OK, well, the cynical realist in me says that Hamas will probably give a few hostages back whilst holding on to many of them. And sadly, I suspect that quite a number of them may have been killed already, and others are going to be killed either by Hamas or by the bombing. So they are in an awful, awful situation. And although I would want to believe that many more will come out, I wouldn't bet money on it. The only thing I would say is if Qatar and others are saying to the Hamas, your reputation is being very badly damaged in the Muslim world amongst Sunni Muslims, that might be something that they will take into account. But Hamas, or the logic from Hamas's point of view as a terrorist organization, albeit one with a strong social base in Gaza, sadly, is that they're going to hang on to these people for the maximum pain for Israel and the maximum attention for the international audience.
But this is the irony. The people who are saying, well, we need to have a ceasefire because then we might get the hostages back. The reason why they took the hostages, they didn't accidentally end up with 229 people. They deliberately went to the Israeli civilian settlement to take these people, to take women and children and families and elderly people, grandmothers. They did that deliberately because they wanted to use them as a bargaining chip. And when the rest of the world, when EU leaders, when 80 Labour MPs here, when Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, when they talk about how, we should have this cessation and hostilities because, it might, be better for the Palestinian people on the ground, but also getting hostages back, aren't they playing into Hamas's hands?
I was actually just about to use that expression, Julia. Yes, they are. I mean, there's two issues here. One is international law. Israel has the right to defend itself. It mustn't break international law. There are lawyers who would say it's already doing so. There are lawyers who would probably argue contrary. It's not up to me to say, but I think they have to be mindful of that because you're playing to an international audience here. And Israel, the worse Israel's reputation, or the more that Hamas and others can present Israel as the aggressor here, which it is not, the more that plays into a jihad, an ISIS style, an Iranian agenda. So we have to be very careful.
Yeah.
But when people argue for a ceasefire, this is just hugely naive. Just like the Russians in Ukraine, any ceasefire will be used by Hamas to strengthen their position. Yeah. So actually, every time you call for a ceasefire, you're just going to make it easier for Hamas to kill people. Yeah. It's incredibly naive. And look, I think Sadiq Khan is I'm afraid to say, a lightweight mediocrity. He always has been. And the only thing he ever does is sort of pick arguments with people on Twitter and virtue signal. I really hope we get rid of him come May because he's a waste of space.
Yes, I just wish he'd rather worry about, keeping people safe in London, the city of which he's actually in charge, rather than worrying about world affairs. You mentioned Iran there. There's this concern about this new axis of terror, axis of evil against the West, Russia, Russia and Iran and China, North Korea, but also these terror groups, the Hamas, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, replacing, as ISIS and Al-Qaeda. How concerned are you about everything spreading wider and these terror groups getting more and more access to the weapons they can use to, inflict their terror?
I'm really concerned because what we're seeing is there's a bunch of trends, but none of them effectively are good. You're looking at the breaking of a global system into free states, authoritarian states, and there's a battleground for the middle for places like Africa, the Middle East, South America.
Yeah, we're losing that battle, Bob.
Hold on. We are just beginning to enter that game. So I agree up till now, but not all is not lost. There is a second axis, which is a very close and closening axis now between the mullahs and the Kremlin. So between Iran and Russia and the sharing of technology, the Iranians want nuclear technology, the Russians want drone technology. So there's a very unhealthy relationship there. And there's the Chinese who are neutral, but sort of supporting indirectly, if you like, the Russian-Iranian axis. So there are lots of negative dynamics. And within the Middle East, you have Iran and its multiple proxies, effectively its overseas agents of terror, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi in Yemen, a series of Shia groups within Iraq as well. And so you have all these groups around, controlled by the IRGC, who are effectively the agents of Iran. And what Hamas has done, the timing of this, just to remind people, is to prevent any normalization of relations between Israel and the Sunni world, and primarily Saudi Arabia. And the more difficult that becomes, this is the problem for the Israelis. They need to destroy Hamas, we understand that, but the more difficult that normalization becomes, and the more months and years it's put on hold, the more that Israel sadly plays into Iran's hands. Okay. So everybody needs to be careful. And our role has got to try to be to keep this normalization alive. Okay. That does not withstand the problems within Israeli politics and some silly politics around settlers in the West Bank.
Okay. Really appreciate you joining us. Great to hear from you. That's Bob Seely. He's a Conservative MP, member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and of course served in the Middle East as well.